Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for the Answering Challenging Interview Questions webinar. My name is Dr. Mary Catherine Arnold, and I'm the Director of Student Affairs for the online campus of South College. Before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone that you have all been muted. So it's important to note that if you happen to have any questions or concerns throughout today's presentation, you can type them right into the questions and answers box that's either located at the top or the bottom of your screen. I'll try to answer all of those questions as we go along, as well as at the conclusion of the presentation. I also wanted to remind everyone that this presentation is being recorded. So although I do hope that everyone has a pen and paper on hand so that they can take some notes, if you happen to miss any of the information, you can request the link of the recording by either emailing me directly, which my contact information will be at the last slide, or you can respond to any of the automatic emails that you received reminding you of the session. In addition, I will also be sure to make these available on our YouTube channel within the next month or so. And then the final piece that you will notice is that tonight's session might be interactive. Yes, that means that you would be expected to participate. Don't worry, all participation is anonymous, but just like when you're in your classes, you need to be able to critically think and see how this information might be able to apply to your specific situation and to get the experience with it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into talking about answering challenging interview questions. So what exactly will we be discussing in tonight's session? In order to discuss how to answer the challenging interview questions that may come up in your interview, we're going to first start off with just reviewing the preparation piece so that way you feel prepared and ready for the interview. We will talk about what it means to know your audience, the significance of walking into the interview feeling like you know and understand the job description, and understanding how you can sell your experiences and accomplishments by aligning them with the job description. We will then also go through some tough questions that you may come across, reviewing some of the really great answers and some of the ones that might need a little bit of work. And finally, before we end the session with the Q&A session, we will review some additional tips for how you should act in the interview when you come across these challenging questions. The one thing that I would like to reiterate is that this session is an interactive session, so be prepared to participate so that way you can get the most out of the information that's being delivered throughout today's session. Now, if you have had the time to watch our Basics of Interviewing presentation, you will know the importance of planning and preparing for your interview and what that can have with experiencing a successful interview. There are lots of different components to plan for an interview during an interview, including the practicing and being prepared to answer all types of questions. However, what this session is really going to focus about is going to be answering those really tough interview questions. So what does that mean that one what is so what does that mean that one of the first areas that we should be prepared with? You should always feel prepared with knowing and understanding your audience. So, what does knowing your audience mean? Does it mean that we should know everyone or everything about every single individual that we're interviewing with? Absolutely not. But in actuality, we are talking about knowing your audience. We're talking about getting a sense of who that company is and what types of individuals or culture they embrace. So when we are answering tough interview questions, we want to be able to answer with words that support that culture and that overall environment. If the company is one that doesn't embrace traditional structure and you are someone who is very structured, then your responses need to demonstrate your ability to work in a less structured environment. If the organization is a little bit on a slower pace and you're used to working in fast-paced organizations, your response needs to show less speed and less focus more on the accuracy component. Learn about the company's successes and failures. So, utilizing resources like social media can be a great way to further obtain a sense of who the company is and learn about that company's successes and failures. Knowing what the company is doing well will help you to gear your answers regarding things like your strengths and weaknesses to show how you will continue to help them complete those tasks as well as they already are doing. Same thing goes for any of their failures. If you notice the trends that the company is struggling with a specific area and you have had experience where you've been successful in those areas, then you definitely want to include that information in your answers as well. It's important to be able to show the hiring manager that you recognize the good and the bad of the company and that you are here to help fill that gap. Now, regardless of your field and the role that you're searching for, you always want to make sure that you know detailed information about the company and the products that they offer. If possible, you want to try using the product or a similar one prior to the interview so you can speak to it and can draw a personal connection to that organization. Now, I know that I said that you don't need to know everything about all of your interviewers, but it is helpful to be able and feel prepared for the interview by knowing what types of backgrounds the hiring manager and or the team already possess. This can not only help you to build rapport within your interview, but you can get a sense of who that interviewer is as well. If you know the types of backgrounds or the accomplishments that your interviewer has already had, you can more easily speak to it and demonstrate and make relationship with it. So you can say, oh, I saw that you actually achieved this. I've done something very similar in my role or in my previous role as well. And this is what I did. Talk to me a little bit more about what you did. So you can have more of a conversational piece because you know something that that individual was able to accomplish. And then the last major piece to being prepared with who you are interviewing with is to understand the type of interview that you're going to be facing. Different companies and business sectors have different types of interviews and interview processes. So, for instance, will the interview predominantly be a traditional face to face interview with more of those normal questions that you could expect? Will it be a case interview? So, talking about one specific scenario that you are going to be focused on throughout that entire interview. Will it be a lunch interview? So, will you be expected to sit with that hiring manager while you're eating lunch? And if so, knowing that how you're going to balance everything that's going on, including eating, because it's impolite not to eat, and as well as answering those questions, but not, chewing with your mouth closed, not speaking when you have food in your mouth. So, being able to balance all those types of components. Is it even a group interview or even a working interview? So, the great thing about when you're typically invited for an interview is you will generally be in contact with the recruiter or someone in human resources. This is the perfect individual to ask about the interview process so that you can have some time to prepare for the appropriate interview format and become familiarized with the style of the interview. In addition to knowing your audience, you also need to know the job description. You need to be able to walk into the interview with a clear understanding of what the day to day tasks and responsibilities would be of you in that role. When you take the time to read and carefully review the job description, you understand the company's expectations of the new hire in this role and the way the company works. You will then want to use the duties and responsibilities as talking points. So, what does this actually mean for you as a job searcher? This means that when you are preparing for the interview, you will need to make a direct correlation between your past experiences and the desired position. When you are focused on the duties and how they relate to your experiences, you are preparing yourself to answer almost any question that would be asked because you will be able to know how your background fits into a multitude of areas of that job description. Remember, guys, the hiring manager wants to hire the best candidate for the position, which will probably be someone who has essentially already completed this type of position before. Understanding the job description will also help you to pinpoint your weaknesses. Interviews can be tricky to a lot of us because we want to be able to show that walking into the position, we can do that job. After all, isn't that what the hiring manager wants to see? Well, although that is the case, you will want to show that you're humble. When we most likely will never meet all of the criteria for a position that we are applying to. And most likely, if we do, that means that it's going to be just a lateral move for us. And a lot of times we're looking for that upward progression. In preparing for your interview and answering these tough questions, your weaknesses should become apparent. When you take the time to review the job description, you will see those areas of weaknesses, and now you have the opportunity to be armed with the specific plans in a way that you can strengthen those areas to speed up the learning curve and make it less apparent. And the last major significance of taking the time to understand the job description is that it's going to help you to formulate your questions. So if the manager asks you a question that you need clarification on because it wasn't either clear in the job description or you're just not really understanding what they're saying, now you're prepared to ask for those questions and ask those questions before jumping in and immediately trying to answer the hiring manager's question. Because if you do jump in immediately and there's still something that you're confused on, it's going to seem like you're actually ill prepared for the interview. In addition, when you are creating your questions by studying the job description, this will help you to for the end of the interview for when the hiring manager asks you if you have any questions for him or her. Although that is not going to be a topic that we cover in this session, that is something that I would encourage you if you didn't already attend or you haven't already viewed the basic of interviewing webinar, because that's going to give you more information about how you should turn that interview on the hiring manager. With the preparation piece, it is also important to familiarize yourself with your resume and your accomplishments. As a hiring manager, I have seen this time and time again where a candidate either outsourced their resume to be written, and then I caught them in either a lie or that they didn't know how to explain the information that was actually on their resume. Taking the time prior to your interview to familiarize yourself with your resume and help the accomplishments and really understand what those accomplishments that are listed on your resume, they're going to really help you to avoid these types of challenges and will actually help to give you a set of guidelines to be successful with answering any of the questions that you're going to come across in your interview. So you might be thinking, well, what if I wrote my own resume? Shouldn't I still feel good about it? Although that is true, there are also some other benefits that make this step of preparation for the interviewing process so important. First, you want to remember that not all hiring managers will review your resume for consideration prior to the interview. I can tell you, and I know personally, that when I have hired in the past, depending on the organization, I may not have even had the time to review the candidates. And I may have just told the recruiter to call and schedule interviews for any candidates who met the basic criteria because I had to trust what my recruiter was doing for me. A lot of times, I was lucky to even have had time to print off the resume before the interview. So that means when I walked into the interview to interview a candidate, that was typically the first time that I was seeing his or her resume and the first chance that I have had to even see why that individual might be qualified for the position. Guys, hiring managers, they're busy, especially because if they're hiring a role, if it's a role that's backfilled, that means that that's someone that left the organization that they're probably helping their team to try and keep that organization or that department afloat. So when they're trying to do that, they don't really have the necessary time to sit there, review a bunch of resumes, and try and remember whose resume goes with what individual and when that individual is going to come in for an interview. So that means, and the other thing to think about, so even though this might be the first time that I'm seeing that individual's resume, although I have some questions of mine that are pre-prepared questions that I'm going to ask every single individual when they walk into that interview, I was still scanning that person's resume to find consistencies and ensure that that candidate would be a good fit for that position. It was crucial that whenever the candidate was saying that they could do something, that it could be backed up by the information that was on his or her resume. Now, regardless of whether or not I had the time to review the candidate's resume prior to the interview, there were many times that I wanted additional clarification or wanted the candidate to speak more on specific experiences. When a candidate couldn't explain a situation or experience in more detail, that was a big red flag for me. As a hiring manager, I'm asking about this because I think that there might be some type of correlation between the candidate's experience and the open role that I have. However, if the candidate can't explain or hasn't given the thought as to how or why his or her experience correlates and relates to the job opening that I have, then that doesn't leave a good impression in my mind. You also want to remember that your resume is just as much of a tool for you in an interview as it is for the hiring manager. Your resume can help guide you on answering specific questions that a hiring manager may ask. Interviews are stressful enough. Even the most seasoned and confident professionals get nervous about interviews, especially when it's a position that that individual really, really wants. So, what does this actually mean for you when we're breaking it down and we're talking about, well, it's going to help to give you some guidance on how to answer your interviews and how to answer these questions in your interview? That means that when you know where you need to look on your resume to confirm those statistics or draw the hiring manager's attention to a specific situation, that's going to increase and improve your chances of making a good first impression and successfully answering that challenging question. You will also find that when you need to use your resume as a crutch to answer a question, that it's going to help you to build a more concise answer. Although a hiring manager will need enough information from you and an explanation to draw a thorough understanding of your successes and strengths, he or she also cannot have an interview that lasts all day long. So that means that because you will have your resume to guide you on the most important pieces of your accomplishments, it's going to help you to keep that answer succinct but yet explanative. And then the final reason you will want to, or that you want to be and find yourself familiar with your resume and accomplishments for answering those tough questions in the interview, is that it's also going to help you to build your confidence. So remember that I said that it's natural to get a little bit nervous, in that almost everyone does become a little bit nervous when they walk into an interview. Well, guys, I mean it. It's the truth. When you are familiar with your resume, you just have more confidence because you're confident in the words that are on that page, and that you know that those are a direct correlation of what you can do. You know that you're able to visualize your strengths and draw a direct connection to them. You can even sit there and point it out to the hiring manager and say, "Oh, well, if you look down in that third bullet point under this job, you'll see that I actually did something very similar to it, and this is what I did." It's going to help you to build your confidence because it's going to guide you to answering interview questions, as well as the fact that you're going to feel more prepared to answer questions that are specific to you and your background. So now that you know some of the steps that you should take to prepare yourself to answer the challenging interview questions, let's take a moment to discuss what some of these questions are and how to answer them. These tough questions tend to be asked for a variety of different reasons. But no matter but no matter one thing that I would like you to realize is that many of these tough situations or these tough questions are commonplace in interviews today. They are used for a variety of different reasons, including that they assist to identify critical thinking and creativity skills for candidates. So, although not every question will be geared towards identifying these areas, you may find it that hiring managers want to hire individuals who are able to think outside of the box and are resourceful. If any of you have younger children or have ever worked with someone who is constantly asking questions, you know that it can quickly become annoying. So when your child comes up to you and they ask you, "Well, why does this happen? How does this happen? Why is this the way it is?" Many times we don't want someone who tries to many times we want someone who's actually going to try and problem solve on their own. There is nothing wrong with someone who will ask a question to verify the solution that they've developed. However, having a team member who is unable to critically think on their own can become tiresome and exhaustive. And at the end of the day, what it's going to do is it's just going to slow down your productivity in that team. There are also times that a hiring manager may be asking you these tough questions to assess your ability to handle stress. Any position, regardless of whether it's considered an entry level position or an executive level, will become stressful at one point or another. Being able to demonstrate your emotional intelligence and ability to strategically process that stress and handle it is important to so many hiring managers. And lastly, many of these questions are implemented to help gauge your ability to reflect and learn. In the perfect world, we would be able to hire someone with no weaknesses. However, we don't live in the perfect world. It is also important to remember that everyone makes mistakes. How we choose to learn from those mistakes and process those events are going to be crucial to our own successes as professionals, as well as to our own successes for future growth. It's important that when these questions are asked from you, that even if we don't have an answer right away, that we stay calm and poised and show our ability to either learn from our lack of experience or learn from our incorrect perspectives and approaches. Being humble is going to really help you with that. So let's take a look at the first challenging question that may be asked of you in an interview. The question is, how would you describe yourself in one word? Well, I don't know about you guys, but when I hear this question and start thinking of it, I begin to panic a little bit. How do I put everything about who I am in one word? Humans are complex and multifaceted, so it can be extremely difficult to devise one word that will cover every single aspect of my entire personality. So when we see this, we might be tempted with trying to say broad and say something like unique or hardworking. But an answer like that is so generic and doesn't help to tell the interviewer a lot about me. Instead, I need to come up with a word that is different, that still describes me, but aligns my skills to the culture of that organization. Remember when I told you that part of preparing was understanding the company and who they really were? Well, this is why. For instance, if the company is a fast paced company, I might use the adjective high energy. If the company is a company that does web development, I might go with an adjective such as meticulous. If it's for a sales job, you might say outgoing. Or if it's a leadership job, you might find the adjective of motivating to be a good one. Now that we have gone through a couple of examples, let's take a moment to type in the questions and answers box how we would go ahead and answer this question about ourselves. You can use something that's on the screen, or you can try and come up with your own. So I see ambitious came through. I think that one is not a bad one, but I think it's also one that teeters on more of a general commonplace word. So we do want to try and think of a little bit a different word that's going to push the boundary. It's not a bad one. It's definitely better than saying hardworking or driven. Ambitious shows that you're going to go above and beyond. It shows that you really strive for a lot of great things. So I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing. Does anyone else have anything to add before we move on? All right, well, let's go ahead and go to the second challenging interview question. The next challenging question that you might come across, you might face that you might come face to face with is, what is your greatest accomplishment? So, for many of my individuals out there who are extremely goal oriented, this can be something that's really tough to narrow down to just one. However, for some of my students who are a little bit more experientially focused, this can be extremely challenging to even think of one. Keep in mind that this question is being asked to really see how you sell yourself. There is no one particular right way to answer this question, but generally speaking, a hiring manager is looking for someone to connect their accomplishments to the position that they are seeking and demonstrate how they might be able to help that company or that team continue to grow and achieve great things. Try to keep it professionally related. However, know that a personal experience would also work for this one as well, as long as you are able to show its relevance to the desired position and company. So, to prepare for answering this question, you may find it helpful to do the following. Create a list of 2 to 3 stories that you feel represent your best work and relate to the position of interest prior to the interview. You also might find it helpful to follow the STAR model, the STAR model, when you are answering this question. So, for those of you who are not aware of what the STAR model is, you will find this extremely helpful whenever you're answering any of your behavioral interview questions in an interview. And behavioral interview questions are typically those questions that start with something like, tell me about a time when, describe this, explain that. When you have these types of questions, you can break down the answer to get a very specific and yet succinct answer. You can literally answer the question of, well, my greatest accomplishment occurred when I was in this specific situation. I was tasked with creating or completing X, Y, and Z and was challenged with ABC. Because of the actions I took, which were X, Y, and Z, I was able to achieve ABC. So it's really going to help walk you through answering that one by one, and even stating the situation, task, action, and result in your answer is going to be helpful for this. And the last thing that, again, you want to think about is ensure that your accomplishment is recent and relevant. So we also don't want something that's years and years ago. So if I said 20 years ago I won my soccer tournament and with my team, and we went through, we played a team that we had played twice prior to the final game, and the first game we lost, the second game we tied, and then the third game and the final game in the championship we won. But that wasn't really relevant because that was 20 years ago. And depending on what the position is, that might not be relevant for the position either, because we might not be able to demonstrate how working as a team or something that's specific to that organizational culture was in that specific situation. So we really need to make sure that it's recent. So something probably within the last year or two, and something that is going to really directly correlate to the types of work and the line of work that I'm going to be asked to do. This next one is similar to the question of what is your greatest accomplishment? Although it is similar, you will see that it is asking for you to explain a situation or moment in your life that may have been a little bit more negative and may have more negative conversation around it. So, this question of tell me about a time when you failed. Let's be honest, most of us do not like to admit when we were wrong or when we failed. You can ask my husband about this. He will tell you that it is like the world is ending whenever I have to admit defeat to him. No matter what, though, we have to remember that we are all human and we all have failed at something at some point in time. If it wasn't something that we failed to the rest of the world, it could be something that we just failed at meeting our own standards. No matter what, we are not perfect as much as we try to be. This question is meant for you to demonstrate that you have the ability to reflect and also demonstrate your modesty. So, to answer this question, be sure to one, utilize the STAR model. Again, this is just like the last question where you want to answer thinking about the situation, the task, the action, and the result of that experience. Also, make sure that you're taking accountability and responsibility for your actions. Don't make excuses or throw the blame on someone else. This is the next, this is going to be probably the most important thing that you can think of. Be sure that you're taking accountability and responsibility for your own actions. As I've said before, we're all humans, right? We all make mistakes. Being able to take responsibility for something when it goes wrong, it really helps you to grow professionally. Even if it was someone else's fault, we still need to note that there were probably things that we could have done differently to help that other individual be successful. Therefore, that drives our own project to success. Be sure to avoid making excuses or throwing blame on others. When we throw blame on others, one, this seems childish. This is something that siblings do when they fight. We also need to be able to demonstrate our ability to learn. And if we're throwing blame on someone else, we aren't showing that. We're showing that we actually have an inability to learn from the experience. Both the good and bad experiences all give us something to learn from. Even if we walk away from a good experience, we're going to walk away with it with one positive thing. And same thing goes with the bad experiences. Bad experiences will probably have a couple more negative things to walk away with, but we can still start to use that information that we gain, use that time to reflect, and make and implement those changes in the future. You also want to demonstrate what you have learned from the experience, because when you're able to do this, you're adding additional context to the hiring manager. Again, you're going to kind of naturally do this if you're already utilizing the STAR model, because that's going to be the result piece. It's important to show that we are learners of life. And then lastly, be sure to keep your response concise and succinct. Again, using the STAR model is going to help you pretty much do this, but no matter what, you always want to make sure that you are keeping it specific enough to the situation and only providing the necessary information to explain about that failure. This next question may be broken up into two subsidiary questions and may ask for more than just one. So the question is, what is your greatest strength or weakness? Sometimes you'll get asked, what is your greatest strength? And then you'll separately get asked, what's your greatest weakness? Sometimes they'll ask you, well, what are your greatest strengths? And they'll want to see a couple. Or sometimes they'll ask you for a specific number, like, tell me what your three biggest strengths are. Tell me what your three greatest weaknesses are. Before we start talking about how you should answer this question, I would like you to each take a moment to type into the Q&A box what you believe your biggest strength and weakness is and how you would answer this question during an interview. So someone said organization. Someone said time management. So I don't know if these are strengths or weaknesses. No matter what, these are all good pieces that we can always talk about throughout today's presentation as well. Someone said note taking. Yeah, absolutely. There were some other ones that I saw. I saw someone said bad handwriting. Let's try and avoid some of those types of things. We want them to be more of those skills that are supposed to be kind of ingrained in our system, not things, not actions that we have to take, but more of those, more of the ways we behave. So a lot of interview questions or a lot of interviews ask this type of question or something similar along this line. Whether your strengths align with the company and the team currently need to, or align with what the team currently needs, and whether you feel like you would be a good fit or not for the role can come a lot from this question. How you respond to this question can help the employer to decide if you are the best applicant for the position. So when responding, you want to make sure that you are using the information that you've obtained from your preparation stage, where you did that research about the company, the team, the culture, the organization in general. Although most of the time your strengths and weaknesses will be soft and transferable skills, where they would relate to all positions, you would also want to remember some of those technical and job specific skills as well when you're answering these questions. This will help you to stay specific to the organization's culture and to the task's role that they're going to have you do. You also want to be prepared with a list of about 3 to 5 of each of these. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes employers ask for one, where other times they may want a variety of them. Now, when you answer them, a lot of times job seekers forget this stage. A lot of times job seekers forget that they need to include real life application for these skills. They need to show a really specific opportunity or experience that they had that will really help to paint a very clear picture about what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, how they're working to maintain their strengths, and how they're working to improve their weaknesses. Hiring managers need to see the context being built around how your past experiences are relevant to the desired position and how those skills and strengths and even those weaknesses will be applicable to the desired position. And then lastly, for answering your weaknesses, especially, don't forget to include specific information on how you improve and maintain these skills. It is important that hiring managers know that you recognize that these are areas that either need to be maintained or improved. You want to showcase your acknowledgement because again, it is showing that you are willing and trying to learn, as well as showing that you are a professional in your field. Now, the question of if you could change anything about your current role, what would it be? That one might stress you out a little bit because it could be a very negative question once again. The key to answering this question is to do it positively. The interview is all about the hiring manager getting to know you, and what this question is trying to identify are the items that you value the most in your work. The hiring manager wants to know that you can set goals for yourself and what types of tasks that you would need in order to keep yourself occupied at work as well. Keep in mind, it is expensive. It is a lot of hard work for employers to hire someone. Yes, I know from the job searcher perspective, it doesn't necessarily seem like it would be that challenging, but there's a lot of time, effort, money, and resources that go into hiring someone. So they want to make sure that they make the right hiring decision, and it's going to be someone who's going to stay there for quite some time. So, how do you best answer this question? So, a couple of things that you want to make sure that you're doing include briefly discuss what you would change about your job. This doesn't have to be extremely lengthy. You just have to make sure that you are giving enough of a background to the hiring manager that that individual can clearly get a picture of the duties or the tasks that you typically have to complete on a day-to-day basis. You also want to explain the why. Just like when you are answering your strengths and weaknesses question, you want to make sure that you're giving enough information and an explanation that is exactly what you are doing with this question. So, for instance, maybe there is a part of your job that you don't like because it seems to take up a large amount of your time. If you explain that when you do this task, you need to block off time dedicated to this task and you feel like you fall behind in other areas, that helps to explain the why you dislike that task. Try to make the changes align with your desired position. So, you also want to make sure that you're aligning that piece of the that you dislike with your current job and trying to find something that you don't like in your current job that's going to most likely not be something that's going to appear in your future role as well. And be informative yet concise. So, just like everything else, be sure that you are giving enough details to paint the picture, but not rambling. You also do want to be mindful that you are avoiding complaining or bad mouthing anyone in your organization or just that overall negativity. Characteristics of either yourself or your previous employer traits, experiences, values, or overall situations that are in opposition of the desired company are things that you want to avoid doing. Again, even though the question is asking about something negative, you always want to paint it in a very positive light. So if you're explaining why, something a task that takes you so long is impacting your ability to complete, other areas, that's still very positive because it shows that you care about every aspect of your job, but that you just wish that you could find a different system or implement a different method that would decrease that amount of time spent doing that specific item. You may also get the question that references your current boss's perspective of you. Guys, I can't tell you the number of times that I've been asked this question. This question is typically asked when the hiring manager wants to hear more positive things about you. Most of us, we don't like to talk about ourselves because it seems a little arrogant or even pompous. However, it is a lot easier to talk about how the nice things that other people are saying about us are happening. This is your chance to use the words of others to talk about you and your positive traits. So, there are a couple different approaches that we can take with this. The first approach that you can take is to quote an official performance review. This is typically one of the easiest because you're able to state all the nice and positive things that your manager has said about you without feeling like you're putting words in their mouth. So to answer this question with the performance review quote, you might say something like, "In my last performance review in October, my supervisor stated that I always take the initiative to go above and beyond for my clients. She stated that she was really impressed with the level of care that I provide and the attention to detail that I deliver to ensure that each of my clients are successful with feeling prepared for the next steps in the process." Easy enough, right, guys? You also can look at telling a story. So, telling a story can typically also help with making things easier to answer this question. Since the question is pretty open ended, this is the perfect opportunity for you to share something you really wanted to mention in the interview, but that it just hasn't come up yet. A way to share the story would be something like, "In my current role, I've noticed that I tend to be the subject matter expert on how to manage a fundraising event. I have a lot of knowledge in this area, which definitely helps, but I have always felt that the reason people come to me is because of the way I am able to methodically work through all the possible outcomes of the situation. If you were to ask my boss, I'm confident that she would describe me as organized, logical, and meticulous, especially when it comes to event and project management." The last major way that you can answer this question is by naming 2 to 3 traits with short examples of each. So, for instance, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I'm pretty confident that my colleagues would describe me as thoughtful. I always am reminding the team of everyone's birthdays and am pretty reliable to ensure that nothing gets overlooked in both the personal and office environments. And moving on to our final challenging interview question that we would be discussing tonight is, why should I hire you? I'll be honest, out of all the questions that we have covered this evening, this is my absolute favorite question. I love this question because this is your time to wrap your interview up in a nice little bow. You get to reiterate everything that is special about you and the main reasons why you are so passionate about that opportunity. Even if you're desperate for a job and you don't care about the specific position, this is your time to shine and seal the deal. Here are some tips to answer this question. First, be sure that your answer is geared towards the specific position. Again, since you would have done all of your research and prepared for how your background and skills overlap these areas, it shouldn't be too challenging for you. Show how you will be an excellent addition to the team as well. So, these might be things that you've picked up throughout the interview based off of the hiring manager and what they've mentioned that they're looking for. Whereas this might also be something that is specific based off of the job description. No matter what, you want to think about that organization's culture and how your personality is going to fit into it. Reassure and exhibit your skills that are different from everyone else. What makes you stand out from the crowd? When you're able to take some time to make sure that you're answering this question, demonstrating what makes you stand out from the rest of the crowd, you're really going to find a way to demonstrate why you are special. And lastly, the hiring manager wants to hire the perfect person for the position. You want to make sure that you are emphasizing why hiring you would make the hiring manager's day to day tasks a little bit easier. Maybe it's from something that the hiring manager stated that he or she doesn't like to do in his or her role. Or maybe it's something that has to do with the longevity of the position. Whatever it is, make it specific to the hiring manager and your skills. So find that way to bridge the gap between the two. So now that you know what a lot of the questions are and what to kind of expect with answering some of these challenging interview questions, hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared for your interview. There are, however, just a couple of tips and tricks that I'd like to review with you, just so that way, hopefully, it makes answering these questions even a little bit easier. Remember when I told you that as a hiring manager, I didn't always have the opportunity to review a candidate's resume prior to the interview? Well, just imagine if I also don't have the time to print one out. If you don't have one when you walk into that interview, one, you're going to appear more unprepared to me than I probably seem to you. And two, I won't have anything to review or make notes on to remind me of why I like you. So make sure that you're always bringing a couple of copies of resumes to that interview. This tip can be extremely helpful, especially if you're someone who gets easily nervous or you're not good at thinking on your feet. Anytime you need to take a break or you need a couple of extra seconds to compose your thoughts, take a drink of water from your glass or your water bottle. Always have water on hand during an interview. It's going to make your life so much easier. Also remember that you don't have to be lightning fast. It's okay to take your time and breathe throughout the interview. Interviewers understand that you may need a couple of seconds to compose your thought. It will, however, help you to smile as well when you're taking that time. Not only will you be viewed as a less welcoming candidate if you're not smiling, but when you smile, it's also going to help you to feel more confident. Even if you think the answer is going to make you look bad, as long as you are demonstrating an honest answer with some positivity around it, you are bound to have success with answering your questions. So always answer honestly. And did you know that there was a virtual interview practice resource available to all South College students? If not, be sure to check it out. It's underneath the Optimal Resume Suite. This resource is there to give you additional guidance and practice preparing for your next interview and all of these challenging questions as well. And then don't forget that we are also here to help you in the South College Career Services Department. Please feel free to let me know what questions you may have, and don't be afraid to set up a mock interview. Sure, mock interviews are really uncomfortable, they can make us nervous, but we need to practice in order to get better. Yes, these webinars are helpful to get an idea of where to start, but it's not going to be as beneficial as meeting one on one and getting that one on one coaching from a dedicated career services representative. So hopefully now you have a thorough understanding of how to answer some challenging interview questions. Before we end today's session, I would just like to open up the floor for any of those questions and concerns that you may have. So go ahead and type into the questions and answers box, the Q&A box, and let me know what questions you have. What do you recommend for nervous interviewers? So that's I'm not sure if I know exactly what you mean by this question, but I'm guessing that you're probably looking for some tips or some tricks on how if you're someone who becomes really nervous in interviews. First thing that I would say would be practice, practice, practice. Practice, it's going to make you feel more prepared. Like you don't have to remember every single thing word for word, but you need to have an idea of how you're going to be answering some of these questions when they come up. You want to feel like you have a good idea to say and provide a very succinct but driven answer. The other thing that I would say is if you're a nervous interviewer, before the interview, maybe listen to a song that really gets you excited and that you find very uplifting. Maybe go for a walk around the block before you enter the building for your interview. This might sound crazy. There are people out there that believe in power posing. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, power posing is when you stand or sit in like a superhero pose for about 30 seconds. You don't want to obviously you don't want to do this in front of the interviewer, but this wouldn't be a bad thing to necessarily do inside the bathroom before you would go into the interview. So there's lots of different tips and tricks. Again, I would say that having that bottle of water on hand is going to really help you with calming your nerves because you can use it as a crutch. Yes, they might think that you're just a really thirsty person. That's the worst thing that's going to happen if you're constantly taking drinks from your water bottle. How long is a mock interview with my career services representative? So that really depends on what you need. I would say at a minimum, they're typically 30 minutes. I've had some mock interviews that have gone for 2 hours. It really depends on what type of interview you have, whether it's going to be like a phone screen or if it's going to be a face to face round one, round two, whatever type of interview it is going to be. We might need to go through some different information for you. I typically, when I do my mock interviews, I'll schedule them for a half hour for the first one. And then a lot of my students walk away with some homework, some things to practice on. And then we always schedule a follow-up one where we go through the exact same questions. So I'm getting to see how their answers are improving, what types of skills that they've implemented. If we need to continue to work on those answering specific questions, we'll go back through, we'll talk them through, we'll have the student write down some of the pieces that we're talking about. We'll have the student then read off what they wrote, work on their delivery, and then, we'll reconvene and do another mock interview. Mock interviews are not meant to be scary. They are meant to be helpful. So for anyone who's out there saying, well, I just don't like the concept of interviewing, so I'm just going to avoid a mock interview altogether, that's silly. Don't let that be the case for you. Are there specific questions I should be prepared to answer depending on my field? Absolutely. Depending on your field and depending on the role, there are specific questions that you might need to know. A lot of these might be more of those technical or clinical questions, depending on your field. If you're really not sure, the Optimal Resume Suite does have some questions that are geared specific to different fields of study. So that might be a good place to go. Another place, if you're really not sure about what types of technical questions might be asked for your field, these are really going to typically be in your healthcare and your IT fields. But if you're really not sure, then you can go on and do a quick Google search to see what are some of the questions, most popular technical questions or clinical questions that are being asked of individuals in these specific roles. And do I have any additional questions this evening? All right. Well, I don't happen to see any. So I do want to thank everyone for attending today's session. I hope that you found the information to be beneficial. Should you run into any additional questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to let me know. I've provided my contact information on this slide for you. I'm more than happy to connect you with your career services representative if it's not me, as well as answer any general questions that you may have. So I do hope that tonight's session helped. At the conclusion of tonight's presentation, you are going to see just a brief survey. You could complete those 4 questions. Just lets us know what additional types of training materials you want to see, what times a day work the best for you for these types of seminars. So that way we can really meet your needs and continue to support you as you continue through your classes and as you enter into being an alumni here at South College. Well, thank you once again, everyone, for attending this evening, and I hope that you have a wonderful night.